Good afternoon, it's Richard Priest here, Director of cybX, and we're about to start the Developing Cyber Resilience webinar from boardroom to server room. For those who arrive late or those who are already attending, we are recording this, and the recording will be available to people on the cybX website after this webinar. So, without any further ado, welcome to all. I see we've got a number of people already online, and I expect a few other people to join us with the sign of the bleep at various times as we go through. So, the agenda for today is really twofold. First of all, it's setting the scene, really to talk about the strategic opportunities and risks of digitisation. And that's really important, because without that understanding of context, then everything that follows afterwards it can be seen to be slightly sterile and not really as a powerful a case as needs to be made. We'll then talk about the specifics of the cyber resilience and the kill chain of boardroom to server room. Why we talk about the kill chain, which is sometimes referred to as in technical terms when dealing with cyber attacks, is in our experience, it's the consequence management tied in with the technical aspects of cyber attacks, which is what is really required to produce cyber resilience as part of overall organisational resilience. So, as part of that, we will talk through the general approach, how you can look at cyber risk assessment, what resilience capability may look like, and then approaches to developing and delivering a cyber resilience roadmap. So, looking at the strategic opportunities of digitisation. Without a shadow of doubt, we are living in an increasingly hyper-connected world. That world is getting more dynamic, more complex, and more uncertain with every day and every year that passes. And as every organisation becomes a digital organisation, to a greater or lesser extent, basing its operating models on that, it needs to be able to consider what those opportunities are within its strategy and have the ability and really the agility to be able to exploit those opportunities, but to do so in a safe and secure way. And I'll just highlight some of the big trends that are taking place, really to drive this home. So, first of all, cloud computing is growing exponentially. Q3 cloud requirements this year were 63% higher than they were last year. And increasingly, business models are being disrupted as people are seeking to use the cloud. And the cloud creates new opportunities, but it also creates new risks, which we'll talk about in passing as we go through. The next big trend is the move to mobile. We currently have about a billion people on the earth who are connected through mobile devices. Over the next 10 years, the next 2 to 3 billion will start being connected. And as more people are connected, the complexity and the dynamism and the uncertainty that those opportunities of digitalisation will take will increase exponentially. So mobile is going to become an increasingly important part of the opportunities of digitalisation. Next, we have the Internet of Things. This is where we're increasingly connecting currently often dumb objects so that we can draw more data and allow greater understanding of the state of objects and our operations, and potentially to control things more from a remote position. Again, enormous potential for driving economic growth, but with that come new vulnerabilities. This will also then support the increasing use of robotics, and whether that is in the area of manufacturing, in greater use of unmanned aerial vehicles, driverless cars, or other aids to robotics, which will increasingly become sensitive, driven by increasing amounts of data and producing increasing amounts of data. The complexity and the dynamism of the global network and company operations will increase. And the final area I'd like to highlight is the increasing use of artificial intelligence, which will be fed by the data from much of this and the supporting underlying algorithms that provide the business logic that will drive new business models and change the way we go about our operations generally. And to show the sort of potential disruption of this is going to challenge as much in the traditional white-collar professional areas as current as it will do in collar areas. For instance, there is already a company board in Hong Kong that has an AI voting member of its board. So true disruption and true opportunities are coming through digitisation. These will drive collaboration and innovation and economic growth and better service, whether that's in the public sector or the private sector, national or multinational environments. These are the trends that we all need to be able to deal with and be able to exploit those opportunities. So that is the business driver for much of what is going to follow, and the reason why cyber resilience needs to be considered as a business issue and not a technical issue. However, those advantages also bring potential risks, and the high-order risks are really in the areas of reputational damage, which may affect your ability to do business and impact on the way that you are allowed to, encouraging people to work with you in national and international markets. It may involve the loss of personal data, be it about your own people or, more importantly, about your customers, and that with consequent regulatory fines in regulated industries or other significant economic impact on organisations. Equally, depending on the organisation, there may be the theft of intellectual property, whether that's from competitors or through other people who are seeking to gain that property. Whilst throughout all this, as all of our operations become increasingly digital, the potential loss of productivity and the unintended consequences that may have, and far-reaching consequences, is gaining all the time. And it should be seen that it's not just within your own organisation where these may arise, but also in your full third-party supply chain and also your many stakeholders, be they customers, regulators, or others who you may be dealing with as a globally connected organisation. So what are the facts and figures? Well, if you take the Cisco mid-year report, and I'll let you read this now, it is quite clear that the levels of cyber attacks are such that we almost now need to assume that any network has been infected to one degree or other, no matter how large the organisation is and how much they have spent on traditional cyber security measures. And to put it into more immediate numbers, if you take a typical enterprise, we are seeing levels of malicious activity which are literally happening every minute, with malware constantly attacking, constantly communicating with attackers, and sensitive data regularly being exported from almost every organisation. This is not a case of government or commercial. This is any enterprise is increasingly subject to attack and subject to being data leakage of this sort. And the reality is, it doesn't matter who you are, it will attack you. And these are just 3 very high-profile events that have taken place in the last 6 months or so. All these organisations have invested huge amounts in traditional cybersecurity and have taken the issue very seriously. The reality is, if the prize is great enough, someone will take the time and the effort and have the skill to find a way in to attack you. So what we see is that cyber resilience is a strategic business issue. It's not an IT issue. And it requires highly resilient organisations who are going to be increasingly adaptive in order to be competitive and agile in this exceptionally dynamic, complex and ever-changing environment that we're finding ourselves working in. That requires accepting that there is a level of risk. There is simply no option to have a zero risk tolerance because any organisation will be breached, and the evidence that we've just been through clearly indicates that. But what we can do is be resilient enough to be able to take those hits and be able to manage the crises that can potentially arise from that. And that means an approach that takes an increasingly integrated and coordinated effect across the different disciplines of an organisation, which increasingly build across the hyper-connected supply chain that all organisations use and the stakeholders with whom they interact and work with. And it's at the basis of that premise, and on the evidence that we've seen so far, that we'll look at how we can build cyber resilience from a boardroom to a server room approach. So, at the top level, you can be seeing that resilience really requires the ability to make good decisions, informed and understanding of the organisation's environment, be it competitive landscape, the physical environment, the social environment, and the technological environment, and any other aspects that are relevant at any one time. Within that, you need to have a clear vision and purpose of what your organisation is there for, the values and priorities that guide and direct the day-to-day implementation of that strategy, and an understanding of the resources of any individual organisation has at its disposal. This analysis and knowledge is the basis from which any organisation develops its strategy as a business, and so cyber resilience strategy and implementation needs to be an integral part of that wider business strategy, so that organisations can exploit the opportunities that they're provided for with a greater degree of assurance that they can be resilient when dealing with the potential risks that will arise. And what we believe this requires, as with all organisational resilience, is a continuous improvement approach with potentially periodically repeated cycles or a roadmap of development. So, as an approach, the first thing is to look at your risk. And to understand your risk, you need to start thinking thief. The motives for why people will want your data, will want to interrupt your operations, will want to cause reputational damage to you, varies dramatically. And these can be from the archetypal teenager who's just trying out and experimenting with hacking, through politically motivated hacktivists, to potentially industrial levels of cyber criminals, through to non-state actors, potentially backed up by hostile states seeking wider economic or political advantage. It's by taking that approach of thinking thief, understanding where your information and what information assets are really important and who may want to have access to them, may wish to manipulate those information assets or deny your operations through cyber attack, allows you to start developing a true risk assessment. There is clearly a leadership and cultural piece. Cyber resilience is as much a people and organisational aspect as it is a technical challenge. And within this, that needs that clear vision and purpose of what the organisation is trying to achieve as a business, not just technically. And to support this requires board-level governance and accountability, which starts pre-breach and goes throughout the incident through to post-breach. In particular, seeking to set direction and bring coherence to all activities to drive coherence. And underpinning all this is the requirement to analyse your organisation, to train and exercise so that that roadmap can be developed and delivered. And our experience is that taking a more agile approach of identifying the maturity model you wish to take, benchmarking where you are on that maturity model, training, exercising, learning through experience rather than through straight paper analysis will enable a far more robust and rapid means of developing cyber capability in this area. And throughout, providing validation and review and honest appraisal of where you sit. So let's look at these in a little bit more detail. First of all, think thief. Sometimes known as red teaming, different types of cyber attacks. So if we take a typical organisation which has its own networks connected to the internet in one form or another, your blue team, the home team, will be carrying out its normal operations as it takes root. But you need to find someone who can red team, work out what they would do in order to do an attack and how they may attack that organisation. And what effects in terms of negative reputational damage, loss of data, intellectual property and loss of productivity that may create. And when looking at those attacks, that means understanding what the characteristics of those attacks are. So breaking those down into the attack vector, or the method and route the attacker is using to form the initial contact with the target and potentially to engage. This may take a fairly technical view, or it may take what is sometimes known as social engineering, and using a variety of techniques in which to penetrate and engage with an organisation. From there, they will find some form of malware. Now, these malware attacks will frequently work on known vulnerabilities or vulnerabilities that they have discovered as a result of their reconnaissance through the attack vectors. Sometimes they may be tailored, and increasingly they are probably tailored to the individual organisation, but others may just use a fairly fire and forget approach and see where they get traction. But all the different payloads and understanding what they may do, what they're trying to achieve, and the fact that they may be layered to achieve a more sophisticated attack need to be considered when thinking thief. And that then takes you into understanding what behaviours the attacker is likely to do, both in terms of the initial attack and any enduring activities they may seek to do. Some attacks work on a relatively smash and grab effect, which is especially when stealing customer data. So they will may take months to get into the position they want to be, and then steal that customer data, knowing that they have potentially a fairly narrow window to exploit their ill-gotten gains. Others, which are perhaps becoming increasingly common, the more advanced persistent threats, are likely to want to stay discreet and continue to harvesting data and carry out other activities, potentially even changing the attacked system's functionality for a prolonged period of time. And some of these APTs have been known to be in position for well over 6 years, sitting on an organization's systems without being recognized. So what does one of these attacks potentially look like? So if we take that breakdown and take a fairly common type of technical attack called an SQL injection, which exploits known vulnerabilities on websites and elsewhere. The targeted attack will scan and seek to discover a particular website that has that known vulnerability. It will then, having located it, do the SQL injection. So, for instance, the Contact Us web page on a website may be used, rather than putting someone's name, actually inserting the code, which will then allow the attack to penetrate the user organization. What the behaviors then does may be layered. So in this particular case, what we've done is that the attacker is seeking to identify user names and email addresses from the employers of that organization. However, as a diversionary tactic, and possibly as a secondary effect, he's decided to do shutdown of systems, so that the defenders are being distracted by that and not realizing that there is potentially far more valuable information being exported out, which then may be supporting a further attack. In this particular case, we've said that the overall effect is to steal confidential information, and in terms of the likelihood of this, 65% of organizations last year were affected by this sort of SQL attack, with over 400 websites identified with this sort of vulnerabilities. And the sorts of websites that includes WordPress, used by a lot of SMEs to host their websites and blogs. So this is a very common vulnerability seen on very commonly used websites and their platforms, which can potentially provide a way in for your third parties into the more secure organizations as attackers gain further information about what they're trying to achieve. So what would this look like? Here we have a typical organization working well on their internal networks, connected to the internet, and everyone quite happily collaborating as necessary. The attacker does a web crawl. He discovers that within that web crawl where the vulnerability is, identifies that, injects his SQL injection into the system, which then, in this particular case, has caused the immediate disruption by not allowing people to log on and cause systems to crash. But at the same time, he's also extracting usernames and email addresses for his further use as appropriate within his context. So this is a very simple but very common type of attack, and how it can then be used as part of a longer-term strategy by the attackers, depending on what their aims and objectives ultimately are, whether that's for criminal purposes, hacktivist purposes, or something else. And as further evidence, this is the sort of level and the time it takes to clean up this sort of attack. Now, if you look at this in terms of opportunity cost as well as financial cost for doing this, this alone creates a fairly significant business case to start building up your cyber resilience, both at the technical level but across the wider capability of cyber resilience, more of which we'll discuss shortly. So that then brings us on to our vision and purpose, leadership and culture. Now, inevitably, these are board-level driven activities, but if that board is to be able to be properly informed to make those decisions, then they need to have an understanding of what the risks are based on the think thief and the red teaming piece. And that needs to be integrated into wider business strategy. And inevitably, they are going to have to make trade-offs. And there are always trade-offs in any parts of resilience between narrowly defined efficiency gains, productivity, enabling innovation, and just-in-time minimum stock holdings. All of these sort of typical business problems are magnified when you start then having to consider the issue of cyber resilience. And it's only with a properly equipped board and management supporting them that people can address those and ensure that there is a true alignment between their vision and purpose and leadership and culture. And ultimately, it means moving away from seeing cybersecurity as a cost center perception to one of a core capability that enables businesses to thrive and survive in the increasingly globally connected world. Underpinning all of these will be almost certainly a change to some values and existing behaviors as people become more cyber resilience conscious and educated in how they go about their business, how they do their planning, and how they conduct themselves day to day, including being aware of the potential for social engineering as a means of gaining access to commit cyber attacks, not just a technical IT problem. So what should boards do? Well, if you take the advice given by the US Institute of Corporate Directors, working with the Internet Alliance and AIG Insurance, this is a summary of the type of things that boards should do, and it's very consistent with UK corporate law as well, and consistent with good practice of any well-managed organisation, be it public sector, private sector, national or multinational. And the first thing is this issue of integration and taking an enterprise-wide risk management approach to cyber risks and ensuring that they are included and considered across the enterprise. This is certainly not an easy task, and if you look at the figures of commercial boards in the UK of major organisations, over 50% of them have cyber risk as a top 10% strategic risk, but only 20% of boards are actually actively managing it at board level, which suggests straight away there is a disconnect between a recognition of the risk and the boards feeling empowered and equipped to be able to manage that risk. That means the boards will need additional time, adequate time on their board meetings and agendas. They will certainly need to understand their legal implications, which will vary from organisation to organisation. But as legislation is increasingly being applied in this area, even in non-regulated industries, the duty of reporting personal data theft in particular is likely to increase. And current EU legislation is likely to come into effect in the next 18 months or so, and is likely to have significantly higher fines than current UK data protection legislation has. Part of this, the cyber risk management framework also needs to be correctly resourced. That requires people and a budget for people to consider how they are going to improve their cyber management. And that is not just the technical equipment that needs to be bought, but it is the whole way organizations are structured to be able to provide cyber resilience and not just cyber security. We've talked about the red teaming and thinking thief, and based on that analysis, boards need to take a very clear view what they seek to avoid, accept, mitigate, or transfer for insurance. And increasingly, insurance organizations are seeking additional insurance and additional measures to be taken for enterprises to be considered insured against cyber risks. So this overall process becomes part of how boards ensure that they are adequately protected financially as much as in overall operations and reputational management. And finally, cyber incident response plans need to be in place, they need to be tested, and they need to be ready to be swiftly executed before any breach occurs. Because to learn this during a breach is not the time to ensure that a company or any enterprise is ready to withstand the potentially exceptionally rapid unfolding of events that a cyber attack can deliver. Which then brings us on to the development of a model. Now, there are many different models of cyber maturity, of organizational resilience maturity. We've produced here a very simple version showing different measures of maturity along the piece against the different components of maturity. You will see that the technology piece is but one component, and that is done by many organizations who are very well equipped to do that. But the mistake that has quite often been taken in the past by many organizations is to consider a technology problem with a technology solution. The reality, as we've shown, is those technology solutions can always be bypassed in one way or another. And so an understanding of your information, the data that is the currency of increasingly of any organization, how that is prioritized and provided protection, and how it's released, retained, and disposed of becomes increasingly important. And again, many organizations are very well suited to support in identifying that. Ultimately, though, it's the way you are structured and organized. So the accountability and responsibilities, the governance processes that are in place that we've just discussed, the processes of how you carry out your threat surveillance and intelligence fusion. What are the incident and event responses that are in place? What is the testing regime that you have? Not just against scenarios and for the incident response, but back down to the technological level, and how are they integrated? And finally, as we said before, it ultimately comes back to leadership, but leadership at all levels. No one person, no one within an organization understands and can provide all the answers. So leaders need to be everywhere, ready to be able to act with the right skills, competencies, and a supporting culture that gives them the support to do the right expected behaviors. So it's only with that holistic view of cyber maturity that people are able to get a clear view of where their cyber resilience will be. Whatever model is is actually adopted. So how does this then allow a kill chain to be taken against different scenarios? Well, if we go back to our organisation with its intranet and internet connectivity and our blue team operating it, we have our red team who are now going to attack and try and attack in different ways. But first of all, you now have an organisation that is carrying out its own surveillance. And this may be both technically on its systems, using SIM tools and other diagnostics, but also pulling in from collaborative platforms such as CISP, the Cyber Information Sharing Portal, which is managed by CERT UK, which encourages its members to exchange information on attacks so that trends can be picked up, because an attack on one organisation may not be unique. It may apply to many others, and only by a collaboration and sharing this sort of information can the trend and the true threat be identified. It can also be understanding your environment, understanding whether you've got disaffected employees who may be vulnerable to influence and manipulation, understanding whether you're working in a particular area where tensions are growing, which may cause someone to want to attack you. So it's this more holistic conduct of surveillance and how you are structured and organised to be able to do it. Some of that, and in fact much of that, can be outsourced very effectively, but again, it's working out what is right for you as an organisation. What this means then is when you are attacked, as you will be, then your first challenge is to recognise that you are being attacked. And this recognition may actually come from external to the systems, or it may come from your technical system surveillance operations. But recognising an attack is the first challenge of any kill chain. Identifying what that attack is and what it's trying to do then starts becoming the second challenge. And again, this is not just a technical issue, and frequently will only start becoming apparent as the more real-world, non-cyber aspects of the attack and its effects start becoming more open and visible. That requires, technically, the requirement to terminate that attack. But in terminating that attack, the technical team will very quickly have to make decisions and recommendations to the non-technical parts of the organisation because of the potential business impact. And this can be a matter of not of days, but of minutes and hours in order to contain the attack as soon as possible. This will often be against an environment where, if law enforcement have been brought in to what is ultimately a crime, who may wish to actually want to follow the attack and keep the attack going. And it's only by thinking through these sorts of issues in advance and working with law enforcement that we can truly start getting comprehensive responses to this. Sometimes terminating the attack is the priority, letting the forensics follow on. Other times, though, it's better to try and find the attacker as well as terminating the attack. But whilst all this is going on technically, and this is a long, drawn-out issue, potentially, there is a significant amount of management of the consequences. And this is where bringing in that wider organizational resilience skills of crisis management, crisis communications, risk management, and business continuity starts becoming key and becomes a genuine boardroom to server room approach that allows an organization to stay resilient, to continue with its vision and purpose with the minimum of interruption and the maximum and the speedy restoration to operations as is possible. And so this is where, by practicing these against different scenarios, organizations can rapidly develop their boardroom to server room kill chain understandings and responses. So how do you develop and deliver a cyber resilience roadmap? Well, if we take the approach we've discussed, the first thing is to start understanding the risk. Think thief. Secondly, integrating that within the organization's business common vision and purpose, so that strategically we're trying to achieve what the organization is about and seeing how cyber can potentially interrupt and cause risk to that. That means leadership and culture needs to be developed to support the implementation of that common vision, but also the ability to think thief and understand the implications that that may have, so that people don't, for instance, walk out of work wearing their name badges and passes from their work, which can be copied and provide a potential route to engineer your way into an organisation, something I commonly see on public transport as I travel around. Governance and accountability. It requires these structures to be put in place for the board and those designated by the board to have a clear understanding of what is taking place, with clear accountabilities and responsibilities of that. And as we've said before, the nature of these attacks means very clear and rapid escalation may be required, or temporary delegated responsibilities, so people can make immediate decisions and then take a slower time decision of how the wider consequence management is going to be taken. Understanding what the business purpose is and what the business impact will be of doing potentially some of the technical requirements to terminate and restore an attack. All of this, therefore, needs to be then underpinned by analysis, training, and exercise. If this is done effectively, it can be done quickly, because by doing more immersive behaviours, training and exercising, people will learn more quickly than being given a written policy, a written set of processes. Rather, by practicing and identifying your policies, you can very quickly identify what policies and processes work, as opposed to theoretically putting them down. And taking, in many ways, for those familiar with software development, a more agile project style approach. So that very quickly, with an initial exercise, you can benchmark where the organisation is against whatever criteria of maturity you've set down, and then develop a series of training and exercising so ultimately you reach the agreed level that you want to achieve for that organisation. Now, in this case, we've put it at the optimizing level. It may be, and it is completely legitimate, to say that that is actually beyond what is required for the individual organisation. And it is only for the board of that organisation to make that trade-off and to make that agreement. Understanding where the risk is, objectively what that may mean, and having considered it with a sufficient evidence base that they can say what they believe the quality of where the organisation should be against the different measures of maturity. This is an iterative process. It can be done as an initial change program of cyber resilience improvement, but even once it's been completed, it will need to be regularly reviewed and continually updated, reflecting the fact that this is an exceptionally dynamic, complex, and uncertain environment that is changing by the day, if not by the hour. So in summary, why we're developing cyber resilience is It's a core business process to achieving organisational success in a hyper-connected world. It's not an additional cost centre. Secondly, highly resilient organisations which have been through this are probably better placed to be able to exploit the opportunities of the digital world. So what is cyber resilience? It's primarily the capability of the organisation to anticipate, prepare for, respond and adapt to an extremely dynamic, complex and uncertain environment where new ways of attack for different purposes are constantly evolving. This is probably the most dynamic market in the world when you consider the way the dark web and the criminal organisations in particular have developed this over recent years. Who should develop it? Well, I would suggest that every enterprise, public, private, national or multinational, is increasingly a digital enterprise. And increasingly, this has got to be seen as a business issue that only the board can take ownership of, because it cuts across organisational functional boundaries, and it is not an IT problem with a technical solution. And it is only with that mindset that every organisation can generally approach this. And as for when, where and how to develop cyber resilience, I think the evidence is it's now and it's an always enduring requirement. As long as the current digitisation agenda and increasing use of technology in new and ever more innovative ways to deliver value are being used. Every organisation, though, is different. The environment is complex, dynamic and uncertain, and it must be tailored. All solutions must be tailored to the individual organisation and which must have the agility to develop and deliver it in that ever-changing environment. And it is only with that overall approach as a handrail that organisations can tailor it so that they become increasingly resilient and increasingly better set to exploit the opportunities of the digitised world. I think I've probably spoken for more than enough time, and it's now open to any questions.